Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Motivate Property Podcast. Today is Monday, the 23rd of March, 2026. Hope everyone out there is having a fantastic week so far. Now, guys, this week we are talking about the current global events that are currently disrupting society, let's say, right? And really how this impacts property and property markets. So, as you can appreciate, over the last couple of weeks, we've had a bunch of questions from clients and our team, and really a lot of different people about like what's happening right now, how's this going to impact property, what's going to happen to the markets, what's going to happen to society. And so today I'm just going to give you sort of my 2 cents of where I think things are at. Now, let's start off with probably the most obvious, and this is the new conflict that is started on with the US, Israel, and Iran. And yes, it does appear that we have just started another war on behalf of Israel. That's what it seems like. That's what pretty much the media is kind of portraying. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think any war is bad. I don't think any war of aggression or war of choice is really anything that we should be wanting to do or anything we should be proud of. But like I said, it does seem like we've just started another war on behalf of Israel. Now, I guess there is a question as to why this is happening. I think, like a lot of different global events, I don't think that there's one particular party that's guilty. Right? I think that there are a number of people who are complicit when things like this happen. And without sort of mentioning any particular names, I think this is very similar to COVID, where someone's done something that, something incorrect, that have done something wrong, and then the powers that be, and there are a lot of people who then take advantage, right, of the crisis, right? I think, a lot of the cases right now, there are a lot of different countries that are really taking advantage of the fact that there is a crisis in the Middle East. What that is and who benefits from that, yet to be determined. We will probably find out afterwards, like we always do. But it does seem as well that there is a very famous quote. And if you guys do some research on this, called "The 7 Countries in 7 Years," this was a quote by General Wesley Clark in the US, where I believe it was in the 90s or in the early 2000s. What he was talking about was a briefing done by the top brass in the US military of essentially invading 7 countries in 7 years. Now, those countries were Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then Iran. For the last sort of 15, 20 years, it seems like we've already done 6 of them, and Iran is the final on that list that has yet been invaded, and their government toppled and replaced with a regime that's more Western, let's say. So it does seem as if the post 9/11 strategy done by the US military is sort of well and truly full in effect. Not to say that wasn't also encouraged by Netanyahu himself, around 9/11. So, again, I'm not saying this is one person's fault. It does seem like that we are doing this on behalf of Israel, and then obviously there are these tertiary benefits that the Western governments can essentially get. Now, why does Israel want to do this? I think there's a couple of reasons. I think firstly, there is very much fundamentally within Israel of establishing old Judea, right? And obviously old Judea, it does encompass the current land mass of Israel, as well as land in some of the surrounding countries. So if that is correct, and that is true, and they do want to essentially rebuild, what was Judea before, then there are a lot of neighboring countries to Israel that are probably going to be invaded by Israel, right, over the coming years. Now, whether that's the case of this, I'm not too sure, but it does seem that all the surrounding countries, prior to them being destabilized and their regimes replaced, it seems like they weren't too friendly towards Israel for obvious reasons, particularly with what they've done to the Palestinians. And so, again, whether this, again, is their intention, whether this is a secondary effect of, some of their excuses, there is, I guess, sort of, reason as to why Israel may want to do this. I think as well, in terms of the US, and obviously this is from a grassroots level sort of way to view this, it does seem like the US has some, let's say that there is some kind of benefit of doing this with Iran. Now, once again, I think all war is disgusting. I don't think we should be partaking in anything, particularly when it comes to, let's just say, missiling, civilian buildings, which is sort of what's been happening over the last couple of years. But obviously, in the name of nuclear threat, in the name of a oppressive regime, in the name of trying to distract people from, say, the Epstein files. Like, I personally don't believe in any of those three things. I don't think that those three things are a real reason or justification that the US should be doing this. Now, when it comes to the nuclear threat, it seems as though Iran was on their way to developing, nuclear warheads and nuclear weapons. So they were at around a 60%. So when they're developing, uranium into weapons grade, they're around 60% of the way into developing from, let's just say commercial uranium all the way through to weaponized uranium. However, there is an argument that they were doing that as more of a latent strategy than an actual direct threat. But the reason why I don't buy into this at all is because, well, Israel has nuclear weapons. Like, there's many countries around the world have nuclear weapons. And so if the US is so afraid of, Iran or a country developing nuclear weapons, well, then why don't we just go and do the same thing to North Korea and China, right, who have nuclear weapons, and we know that. So again, I don't personally think that is really a justification that makes a lot of sense in the media, even though that's what they're saying, because there are other countries that have developed it and we haven't invaded them for some strange reason. Secondly, to say that we need to, bomb them and take over the regime because they're oppressive, I also don't buy into that. There are many countries around the world that are very oppressive, and again, I'll use the example of North Korea. There's many countries throughout Africa. There are currently multiple genocides that are happening throughout the Middle East and Africa, not in Iran, and Asia for that matter as well. And we don't see us going invading those countries, right? It seems to be we're invading Iran for some reason, or trying to start a war with Iran. So again, I don't believe that the oppressive regime really has anything to do with it, because there are many other countries that are even more oppressive and we don't do anything about those. Is this a distraction from the Epstein files is one of the things that I keep hearing. Again, I don't really believe that, all right, because there are a number of other ways that we can distract the public. I know one of the things that people keep talking about right now is a lot of this UFO disclosure is now starting to become, a hot button topic. There are many ways to distract people with propaganda other than starting a new war on behalf of another country. So again, I'm just not personally buying into those 3 points. Where I do think the US will benefit.
If you're overwhelmed by property investing, you're not alone. Most people waste months researching the wrong suburbs, stressing over inspections, and second-guessing every decision. Motivate Property cuts through all of that. We analyze the data, shortlist the strongest opportunities, inspect on your behalf, and negotiate so you don't overpay. The result is simple: a property that actually performs and moves you closer to financial freedom. Learn more at motivateproperty.com.au.
Is essentially in the war of oil, which seems to be the main thing that's really, really happening right now. So obviously, in the US launching this war of aggression on behalf of Israel to Iran, I think most of us were pretty well aware that the first thing that would happen is the Strait of Hormuz would be closed, right? That's that kind of, that little kind of, waterway that goes past from pretty much Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, all the way through around the UAE in Saudi Arabia, and that's essentially one of the largest shipping lanes in the world that takes essentially oil from Iran all the way through to China. Now, is the US doing this intentionally? Are they doing this to kind of get these sort of benefits? Right? No, none of us will ever really know, I guess. But it does seem like this was part of the playbook of getting them to react this way and have the Hormuz, like the Strait of Hormuz, closed. Now, I've been there when I was in the Navy. I served there. We patrolled those waters. So I am somewhat familiar with the area and how important it actually is for the global distribution of oil. However, I also want to point you guys' attention to the fact that prior to striking Iran, the US single-handedly in basically 24 hours overthrew Venezuela. Now, when I say overthrew Venezuela, they obviously toppled the head of the snake, per se. And the current government, who is the deputy, and onwards, it's still the same regime. They've just removed the head, but it seems like that regime is now well and truly compliant with the US. And keep in mind, Venezuela is a massive oil exporter. Just pay attention to how they secured Venezuela and secured the oil in Venezuela just prior to striking Iran and then having the Strait of Hormuz now shut down. So again, it would seem, if anyone's paying attention here, that these two things may be joined or they may be connected. it does seem like, the benefit of striking Iran and having the Strait of Hormuz closed is the fact that one of the biggest exporters of oil from Iran, one of the main beneficiaries is China, and then obviously Russia. And so to have China's energy now impacted, well, that would only benefit America, because that's obviously one of their main threats. And so I think, lowering Iran's oil capacity, lowering China and Russia's oil capacity, I think this is, again, one of those, little benefits that, let's just say that it may be intentional for the way that the dominoes have essentially fallen this way. Now, what does that do to the global market? I mean, right now we are still feeling like an oil shock here in Australia. I'll talk about that in just a second. But in one hand, consider that the US is in $30-odd trillion worth of debt. And their debt, just the interest on the debt is around $1 trillion a year at this point. Now, there are two ways to essentially, and this is with any business, right? And let's take the US government as a business. There are two ways that any business can really get themselves out of trouble. Way number one is you stop spending, all right? And it doesn't really seem that's, what the US is doing. So you either stop spending and you hope that essentially that what the country is producing kind of catches up with their expenditure. The gap is way too big. I don't think that it's even possible to do that at this point. Way number two is to essentially reinvest in the country, reinvest in essentially what is being produced, and then export even more so that you as a business in the government, you're actually outputting a lot more things. Now, to, let's just say, inadvertently shut down Iran's oil production. Prior to that, they were able to secure Venezuela's oil production, and obviously the fact that the US is now also ramping up their oil production. It seems like this was actually a strategic move, right, to create more reliance on US oil and less on, say, the Middle Eastern oil. Considering that, pretty much all of the oil today that's being sold by Saudi Arabia is still in US dollars. Now, I do think that there is a slightly bigger play here happening, where by attacking Iran's oil and the shipping lanes, it's essentially left the US as being this golden calf that can now start producing oil for itself and for the rest of the world, and start selling that oil to the rest of the world in US dollars. Now, why is that important? Because that is one good way of essentially helping decrease your debt if your overall production increases, and it also strengthens the reliance on the US dollar. See, right now, guys, the US is in more debt than I'm pretty sure any country in the world and in history. The only reason why the US has that debt and are still maintaining their position as the number one country in the world, and again, guys, I'm a US citizen. I'm American, right? And I'm also Australian, but this is technically my home country. I'm about to talk shit about here, right? But the point is, the only reason why they are still the number one country in the world, right, and they've got so much debt is because they have the ability to print money, right, and print their currency and sell it to the rest of the world. Now, why is that the case? It's the case because their dollar is the global backed currency, particularly when it comes to all the transactions for things like oil. And so the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and all of the countries that are trying to be a part of the BRICS nations, which is breaking away from NATO, those countries want to break away from the US dollar. They want to be transacting in oil, not in in US currency. Now, why? Because they want to essentially remove the US currency as being the back currency. Why? Because of the inflation, right? The fact that the US government continues to keep printing, and they're printing their way, and that's what they've done over the last 30, 40 years. Now, the US attacking Iran, closing the Strait of Hormuz, creating their own global demand for American oil and oil from Venezuela that they've technically got control over, it essentially reinforces the fact that the US dollar is the demanded currency. So that is a fantastic way for America to essentially keep the power, per se, in their own hands, and then just continue printing their way out of their trouble and out of their debt. All right. So again, I think there's a little bit more to it than just the US. You're just striking Israel on behalf of Israel. Oh, sorry, striking Iran on behalf of Israel. I do think that this also has a lot to do with more of an energy war, and also a currency war based on the fact that, there are many countries, Iran being one of them, China being another one, that they want to break away from the US dollar, and this is a fantastic way for the US to keep the power back in their hands. So again, guys, do your own research. Don't just believe what I say. Look into this stuff yourself. But I can certainly see, America, a few ways that America will benefit from this long term. Now, when it comes to Australia, right, this has obviously caused some problems here in Australia. Now, when I say it's caused some problems, just this morning, I paid $2.99 for a litre of diesel, right? So basically, diesel prices have almost doubled. They've gone up by about 40% in the last couple of weeks. Now, this is, for me, increasingly frustrating, not because of the price of oil. Well, obviously, that's friggin' annoying at the Bowser, but more so on the basis that we here in Australia, in WA in particular, we are literally the most nutrient place on the like we have more here in WA than any other state in the world. We've got oil deposits here. We've got everything that we need to be completely self-sustainable. And yet oil and the fuel cost in Australia has risen the most out of anywhere else in the world. Right? There was an article I saw the other day saying that the inflationary price of oil right now because of this war is bigger here than anywhere else in the world. Now, I've got a problem with that. And the problem is our powers that be, the people in charge, have once again fumbled their way to being in a position where there is now a huge demand for oil. There's supply chain issues around the world. And we are not even self-sustainable as a country because of the way that we are being governed. Right? Now, we've got huge oil deposits. We should be completely self-sufficient, and we're not because of our current climate change policy and net zero policy. Right? It's the fact that the left and the Greens have been in control for so long, we have completely hamstrung our own industry and our own energy production. There's another example where we're not going down the path of coal. Instead, we're going to go down the path of wind farms. There's another gigawatt worth of energy in this massive project that we're now doing with wind farms in WA. And yet another example of making a complete fool and mockery out of our economy in the name of virtue signaling nonsense.
Whether you're buying your first home or third or fourth investment property, Motivate Finance Team has you covered, finding the best lender to fit your needs. And here's the truth. If you haven't reviewed your lending in the last 12 months, you're probably overpaying. Banks reward new customers, not loyal ones. We review your structure, compare lenders, and build a finance strategy that actually supports your long-term goals. Whether you're refinancing, upgrading, or building your portfolio, your lending setup matters more than you think. Visit motivateproperty.com.au/finance to get started.
And once again, guys, like us as a people are now paying almost double what we were for fuel for our basic needs than we did a month ago because Australia is just not self-sufficient. We are completely reliant on other countries, despite the fact we've got more oil here than we know what to do with. We've got more oil to fund our own economy for at least the next couple hundred years. And we're not touching it because it's bad for the environment, yet we've got no problems of buying the oil from another country and bringing it here and using it. We're all on the same friggin' planet. It's not like, the problem with us producing our own oil here in Australia, it's not like that problem's going to go away. We're just moving to another place in the world. Like the entire thing is absolutely nonsense. But the point is, us, you and me, as the people living in this country, we've now got to almost pay double in oil because our government can't run anything. That's the situation we're in, right? And that's fundamentally the main problem that I've got with our current supply chains. Now, the RBA last week has just increased interest rates. Now they're doing that because of the pressure that this war, the conflict, the supply chain issues is going to be causing when it comes to inflation. Now, again, I have seen a bunch of articles over the last couple of weeks, and what they're essentially saying here is that these supply chain issues is going to cause fuel prices to increase, and therefore that's inflation. That's not inflation, guys, right? So there is a difference between prices moving because of supply and demand and then prices increasing because of inflation. Two different things. And yet the media right now is just kind of talking about it if it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. Two completely different mechanics, two completely different reasons, two completely different effects when it comes to the market. Now, right now, we're in a situation of some supply and demand issues across the world. Now, again, like I said, I would argue against that, right? I'd say we've got more than enough supply of our own oil here in the country that we're not using. But, essentially, because that's not being used, it does put a supply constraint in Australia because it's obviously got to come from somewhere else. The point is, the government believes that because of these impacts, we could head towards a recession. All right. And then in order to prevent ourselves from a recession, we're going to then go and increase interest rates as a blunt mechanism to essentially increase the cost of money, increase the cost of things, to slow the market down, and inadvertently cause a recession in itself. Right. I've got some problems with this, right? As you guys can probably tell. Firstly, I think we need, as a people, we fundamentally need to understand what this actually means to us. Now, what I mean when I say that, when prices increase because of supply and demand, that by default doesn't automatically mean this is just because of inflation. Inflation is money being devalued over time, right? The cost of fuel doubling, let's just say in the next couple of weeks, and then it goes back to normal. That's not inflation. That's supply and demand. That's issues with supply chains and obviously having increased demand. These two things are very different, right? Very different mechanisms. Now, when the government and when the RBA, when the mainstream media can go and put this information out, and they're kind of blending, these price increases because of supply chains, just blending that in, and therefore that is inflation. It takes away all the power because we're not actually dealing with what inflation is and what it's caused. The reason why we have inflation, guys, right? Again, don't just listen to me, do your own research. The reason why we have inflation today is because of government overspending. That is it. We import 500,000 people here in the country. That 500,000 people under quantitative easing actually lowers inflation. Why does it lower inflation? Because every person that moves here is worth something in terms of income tax, right? So if we just bring a couple over here from, let's just say they've migrated from Asia, the husband and wife now go to work. There is literally tens of thousands of dollars per year for the husband and the wife who are now generating tax revenue that goes straight to the government. That's the government's income. That in itself, they weren't here a year ago. They're now here. Those jobs have now been created because there's now more businesses, there's now more people, there's now more barbers, electricians, more plumbers, there's more businesses that open up because there's more people, there's more requirements. The creation of jobs, the creation of now new incomes and therefore more tax. This is now more income for the government, which then works against what our inflation rate's doing. It works against the inflationary effects against our money, against our wealth here. And so, we're in a situation where our population is increasing faster than what we can control it. We don't nearly have enough houses. There's not really anything that's being done about our housing risk. I mean, sure, there's a few headlines out there, but there's nothing fundamentally really happening when it comes to supply of housing that the government's actually doing here. And so as far as I'm concerned, we're kind of living in clown world right now. All right. Notice how time goes on, shit's actually getting worse and worse and worse for us. Despite the fact we've got more information, our politicians are supposed to be smarter than they've ever been because of all the information we've got. And notice how things are getting objectively worse by just about every metric as we move forward. So obviously we're not being managed very well. I'd be fair to say. Now, notice that the narrative in the last couple of weeks from the Australian government is now they're using the term inequality. Now that's interesting. Now, why do you guys think that this is a word that I'm using very particularly? Now, for those who've already sort of picked this out, you'll know what I'm saying. When we start talking about inequality, and this is now the problem, this is the big problem, guys, you got to understand that is late socialism, early communism talk. Now, what do I mean when I say that? All right. I was explaining to my family the other day, all right? Australia, in my eyes, we are very much leaning into a socialist economy. All right. Now, when I say socialist economy, right, we do have a hybrid economy, right? Most countries, most Western countries have a hybrid economy, of a blend of capitalism and a blend of socialism. Now, the capitalists would be the right, the socialists would be the left, your left wing, right wing. Notice how socialism normally goes, right? And I'll give you guys essentially the pattern to be aware of. So when socialists get into power, and our socialists, who are running our government today have been in power for a number of years, and the longer they're in power, the more we swing towards socialism. Now, the problem is socialism throughout history has always turned into communism for this exact sequence of events I'm about to lay down. Now, the first thing that happens is we have this problem that, there's this disparity between the wealthy and the poor. All right. In other words, we really need to tax the rich, and it's the richest people. They're the problem. They're the ones who are causing all these issues. And, we need to go and tax we need to obliterate the wealthy, because they're not paying their fair share. So what happens? We increase taxes, particularly for the wealthy people. All right. So, right now, as an example, if you earn over $190,000 per year as a single person, you're now paying 47 cents on the dollar. So let's just say, for example, you're earning 190 grand a year and you want to go start a side business. Well, every dollar that you make on that side business, half of it's going to go to the ATO. So anything that you do is now worth half because of the tax rate that you're in. In other words, it doesn't really cause ambitious people to really want to stay here. The innovators, the risk takers, the entrepreneurs, they're going to go and start those businesses in other countries now. Because why would they do it for half of their money here when they can go do it in the US, they can go do it in Panama, they can go and do it in Dubai, Singapore, and keep the majority of their money? They'll just do it in Singapore. Right? They'll just move operations offshore, and then now we're essentially getting Australian businesses and wealthy people in Australia to now we're forcing them overseas. So what happens? We increase the tax for the wealthy. That's the first thing that happens. Second thing that happens is with now all this extra tax revenue, the government then bloats itself. It gets bigger and bigger. Why? Because we've got to provide more services. We've got to provide more healthcare, more education, more this, more that, more free things for the people, because our people want free things because it's socialism.
If your investment property is being managed, but you're still dealing with stress, vacancies, or tenants who don't respect the home, you don't have a property manager. You have a problem. Motivate Realty runs property management the way it should be done. Clear communication, strict tenant screening, proactive maintenance, and complete transparency so your property stays protected and your rental income stays consistent. If you want a property manager who actually treats your investment like a business, visit motivateproperty.com.au/realty.
Now, what starts to happen is the government gets bloated, there's more bureaucracy, there's more layers to the government, and just to be clear, guys, and again, do your own research, we today in Australia have the most bloated government on the planet right now. All right, Albanese, his government has bloated the Australian federal government and the state governments. They are now 17 in one. So for every 17 people, citizens, there is now one politician or one bureaucrat. Now, most countries, it normally sits around 20 to 30. Right, we are now 1 in 17. We've got the most bloated government on the planet. And notice how the government is still overspending. They still can't balance the budget. And like I said, guys, that is the thing that is causing inflation. All right? Not oil prices. It's government's overspending. So right now, we are in stage 3 where we're increasing the free services. So this is the stages, right? So increase taxes for the wealthy. The government then bloats itself. The government then is able to provide more free services, more education, more free medicine, more free this, more free that, because that's what their fan base wants. Then stage 4 is when the wealthy start leaving the country. All right? I mean, there are going to be multinational businesses, multinational corporations who will either refuse to open up operations in Australia because why would they do it when half of their money is going to go? Or they start moving their operations offshore. Just so you guys know, I'm starting another company in the US pretty soon. All right, as a US citizen, just to get income distributed out of the country and some of my operations offshore. Why? Why would I want to stay here and get taxed half of my money? when I can move business operations into multiple different countries and then be in different tax legislation. Like, it's like right now, there are over 1,000 Australian millionaires every single week that are currently leaving the country. Now, we continue this. What do you guys think happens to tax revenue? Goes to the floor. Then what has to happen, because obviously all the wealthy are now gone and there's not enough tax revenue to keep paying for everything because all the wealthy have left, they've then got to lower the thresholds for those taxes, and those taxes now broadly apply to everybody. So now everybody's getting taxed more because there's no wealthy people left. What then starts to happen is we get to this point where it's actually unworkable for the average citizen. All right, the cost of living, the cost of debt, the cost of prices, what they're earning, it's so unworkable because they're getting taxed into obliteration. So then the final step is the government has to start taking all of the assets. They've got to take all of the businesses, and they essentially have to reallocate the wealth and redistribute the wealth based on what your needs are, i.e. a full communist state. Now, I personally don't think that we'll get to that point, all right? Because I think that right now, the surge that One Nation is currently having, One Nation are not going to let this happen, right? I mean, they're the opposite. They're well and truly on the right, and there isn't, I would say there's a fair argument that they're probably on the far right, right? The point is, I don't think One Nation's going to allow this to happen, right? And I think with the current trend, One Nation will be in power by next election. And when I say in power, they're going to have obviously majority of the Senate, and they're going to be stopping everything. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, so I think there's going to come in more problems with that. But the point is, guys, it's important to understand where we're at right now as a society and then the direction that we're heading. All right, and obviously the signs that you're going to start seeing to confirm that, yes, this is correct and we are actually heading that direction. Now, why is this important, guys? And why am I sort of going through all of this? The point is, when we are fearful of wars, interest rates, let's just say supply chain disruptions, conflict, particularly when it has to do with energy and oil, right? You got to understand these things are out of our control, and they don't directly impact property and property prices, right? To say, for example, because of the Iran war, therefore property in my suburb in Tasmania is now going to go down is not how it works, right? Despite the fact that's where most people are concerned about. It doesn't matter how many missiles get sent from Israel to Iran to southern Lebanon. Like that doesn't directly impact prices in your suburb. All right? We got to understand your local suburb, your local market, the prices in your area are basically subject to your current local economy and the supply and demand of that area, not what global events are doing. However, we all kind of feel that they are correlated. They're not correlated, right? And one thing to think about here, guys, there are 8 independent major property markets in the country, being the metro cities. Each one of those metro cities are doing different things at different times. And right now, Melbourne's in a bit of a slump. Perth is well and truly booming. Sydney's kind of like at a bit of a peak that's sort of stabilizing. So the point is, there is a war that's kicked off in the Middle East, another war that's kicked off in the Middle East, and notice how the property markets in Australia are still doing different things. Like they're not all moving at the same time. So again, it's just to show you that what happens globally doesn't impact your prices locally. Your prices locally are subject to the local economy and supply and demand. Now, yes, there are things that impact the local economy, right? So for example, here in Australia, on the basis that we've got more resources here in WA than anywhere other state in the world, it's fair to say we're quite insulated from most of these problems. And it would be fair to say and fair to assume that we're probably going to start increasing our mining production here in WA, which actually increases the demand for our resources, increases our wealth, and therefore increases population, increases property prices. So this is a really good example where an event like this is probably going to increase our prices. Now, my evidence for that, look at the last 5 years. Notice how we went during COVID. It was a global event that occurred. We also kicked off another war. The Ukraine-Russia war kicked off. Supply chains got scrambled across the globe. We increased interest rates higher and faster than we've ever increased them in history, 13 times in a row. And notice where the property market is versus it was 5 years ago. It's doubled in most places around the country. So what does that mean? I'm not saying that by going into a war, increasing interest rates, therefore by default it's going to double the market. I'm not suggesting that. I'm trying to get you guys to understand why. We've already had another war that started in the last couple of years. We've had interest rates rise. We've had supply chain disruptions from COVID and the war in Ukraine. I mean, the amount of stuff that comes from Ukraine and through Ukraine is insane, right? But the point is, the things that everyone's concerned about right now in terms of this new war, supply chains, oil prices, interest rates rising, everyone's freaking out thinking the market's going to crash. Guys, we've just been through these exact three things in a row in the exact same way that it's happening right now, and objectively look at what happened to the property market here in Australia. It has doubled. Now, all I'm trying to suggest here, guys, this global war, or this current war between Israel, US, and Iran, the increasing interest rates, the scrambling of our supply chains, this is not going to be crashing the market anytime soon, because the market's a function of supply and demand. All right? In fact, there is obviously there is an argument to say that in theory, all of these things should crush the market. I absolutely agree with you, in theory. But the theory is always based off the market being balanced, and then we're making our decisions from a balanced market. We're not in a balanced market, guys. We are in a critical shortfall supply of housing. So while we're in a critical shortfall supply of housing, what we actually need are more houses being built for the population. These supply chains and the issue of the supply chains is only going to make materials more expensive. Rising interest rates is only going to make money more expensive. All of these things are going to make people supplying houses even harder. Now, unless the supply of housing changes, unless we can essentially get way more houses built, I mean, last year in Perth, we grew by about 70,000 people. We built like 24,000 homes. So unless we can do something that's going to end up building 40,000 homes, 50,000 homes, this shit's just not going to change. It's just going to keep going on because of the amount of people we're bringing over here as a country. And so, to summarize, guys, this war, the interest rate rises, the changes of capital gains and negative gearing, and all this conversation of trying to remove the tax benefits and incentives for property investment because of inequality, all of this stuff, all it is going to do right now is continue disincentivizing people putting their money into the property market, and therefore those people are the ones who are actually supplying houses to the market. All right, put two and two together. If you disincentivize the supply of housing, you're going to get less houses. Guys, we have a market that is on the basis and it functions based on supply and demand. All right? So, in other words, I right now have even more reason to be even more bullish when it comes to buying more houses in the country, more investment properties, keep accumulating, because all that's going to happen right now, guys, all of these things are only going to keep pushing the house price even higher. Now, I don't like to really kind of do the I told you so's. I've been saying this shit for years on this show, right? Like a lot of the stuff that I'm saying today is not new. I've been repeating myself over and over again over the years as these things have happened, kind of foreseeing what was gonna essentially take place. Now, I've been saying to my clients for years, these markets are booming, and they're going to be booming because we're bringing way too many people versus the amount of house that we've objectively got. Now, all of these conversations of capital gains and negative gearing and inequality and raising interest rates and wars and all these different things, I know it's causing people stress. I get it, right? It's fucking horrible. War is in my mind, one of the worst outcomes that we could possibly have as a human species. And yet notice that despite the fact that these wars are happening, notice what our property market's actually doing. Cool. So I hope that helps, guys. Any questions, please put them in the comments. Thank you for listening. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.